The dust had barely settled on the courthouse steps when Zelda Olsen felt the first stone strike her shoulder, sharp enough to make her stumble but not enough to silence the fire still burning in her chest. She had spoken the truth about Reverend Samuel Blackwell in front of the entire congregation that Sunday morning, and now Jamestown, California wanted her blood for it. "Get out!" Someone screamed from the crowd gathering in the summer heat of 1878. "We do not need your lies poisoning this town." Zelda steadied herself against the wooden railing, her dark blonde hair coming loose from its pins, her simple cotton dress already covered in the red dirt of the Sierra Nevada foothills. She had known what would happen when she stood up during the sermon and accused the preacher of stealing from the church fund, of taking money meant for the widows and orphans and spending it on his own comforts. She had seen the ledgers with her own eyes when she cleaned the church office, had traced the numbers that did not add up, had watched him ride through town on an expensive new horse while Mrs. Patterson went hungry trying to feed her 4 children after her husband died in the mines. But truth had a price in a town where the preacher held more power than the sheriff, and Zelda was about to pay it in full. "You will leave Jamestown before nightfall," Reverend Blackwell announced from the top step, his voice smooth as honey and twice as deadly. His black coat was immaculate despite the heat, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We have no place for women who spread malicious gossip and disrespect the house of God." "It is not gossip when I have proof," Zelda shot back, her voice carrying across the square despite the trembling in her hands. "Show them the church books. Let them see how the numbers do not match the donations." The Reverend's smile never wavered, the ravings of a troubled woman. "Perhaps too much time alone has addled your mind, Miss Olsen. We will pray for your soul once you are gone." Another stone flew, this one grazing her temple. Zelda tasted blood as she pressed her hand to the wound. The crowd was growing larger, uglier. Faces she had known for 3 years since she arrived in Jamestown as a seamstress looking for a fresh start. Faces that had smiled at her in the general store and complimented her needlework, now twisted with righteous anger. The preacher had them in his palm, and they would tear her apart if she stayed much longer. She descended the steps carefully, trying not to show fear, trying to hold her head high even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Where would she go? She had no family, no horse, barely any money saved. The stage did not come through until Thursday, and today was Monday. 3 days might as well be 3 years when a town wanted you gone. The crowd parted reluctantly as she walked through, their hatred palpable in the scorching August air. She made it to the edge of the square before a hand gripped her arm, pulling her into the narrow space between the hardware store and the saloon. "Keep walking and do not look back," a low voice instructed. Zelda found herself staring at a man she had seen around town but never spoken to, one of the ranch hands from the spread east of Jamestown. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in spring. Dust covered his worn jeans and chambray shirt, and a black hat shadowed his angular face. She guessed him to be around 25, maybe a year or 2 older than herself. "I do not need help from a stranger," she said, trying to pull her arm free, but his grip remained firm without being cruel. "Maybe not, but you are about to need help from someone and I happen to be here." His gaze flicked to the alley entrance where shadows of the mob moved past. "Name's Ryder Zimmerman. I work the Triple Creek Ranch, and you were right about the preacher." Those last words hit her like a bucket of cold water. "What?" "I said you were right. Come with me." Ryder released her arm but started walking deeper into the alley, clearly expecting her to follow. "I have a horse 2 streets over. We can be out of town before they organize a real search party." "I cannot just leave," Zelda protested, even as her feet moved to follow him. My things, my sewing machine, everything I own is in my room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. And Mrs. Henderson is probably packing it up to throw in the street as we speak. Ryder glanced back at her, his expression serious. I have been watching Blackwell for months, waiting for someone to have the courage to call him out. Took more guts than any man in this town has shown. But courage does not mean much if you are dead, and that crowd is working itself into a frenzy. They emerged onto a quieter street where a bay gelding stood tied to a hitching post, saddlebags already packed. Ryder untied the reins with quick, efficient movements, then turned to her with an expectant look. "Why would you help me?" Zelda asked, suspicion warring with desperation in her mind. "What do you want in return?" Something flickered in Ryder's eyes, something that might have been respect. "Maybe I am tired of watching good people get crushed for doing the right thing. Maybe I have my own reasons for wanting to see Blackwell exposed. Maybe I just cannot stand by while they stone a woman for telling the truth." He swung into the saddle, then extended his hand down to her. "Or maybe I am a fool. But right now, you have about 5 minutes to decide if you are coming with me or taking your chances with that mob." A roar went up from the direction of the square, angry voices calling her name. Zelda looked at the stranger's outstretched hand, calloused and strong, offering her a lifeline she had no reason to trust. But the alternative was facing that crowd alone, and she was not ready to die for her convictions, not when there might still be a chance to prove she had been right. She took his hand. Ryder pulled her up behind him with surprising ease, and she wrapped her arms around his waist as he kicked the horse into motion. They galloped down the back streets of Jamestown, past the stamp mill that pounded ore day and night, past the shabby tents of the newest prospectors, past the Chinese quarter where laundry hung like colorful flags in the still air. The town fell away behind them as they rode into the Golden Hills, following a dusty trail that wound between scrub oak and manzanita. Zelda pressed her cheek against Ryder's back, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, feeling the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. Everything she had built in 3 years was gone. Her reputation, her home, her livelihood, all sacrificed because she could not keep silent while a charlatan in a collar robbed the vulnerable. They rode for an hour before Ryder finally slowed the horse to a walk. The sun was lower now, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, Zelda could see a cluster of buildings that had to be the Triple Creek ranch he had mentioned. "We are not going to the ranch," Ryder said, as if reading her thoughts. "Boss is friendly with Blackwell, goes to his church every Sunday. We cannot risk it." He guided the horse off the main trail onto a narrower path that led up into the hills. "There is an old line shack about 5 miles from here. No one uses it anymore since we moved the cattle to better pasture. You can stay there until we figure out what to do next." Zelda loosened her grip on his waist slightly, suddenly aware of how intimate their position was, how much she was depending on this man she barely knew. "You have already done more than anyone could expect. You do not owe me anything more." "Maybe not," Ryder agreed. "But I started this when I pulled you into that alley, and I do not leave things half-finished." The line shack turned out to be a small wooden structure with a sagging roof and windows covered in oiled paper. But it was solid enough, with a pot-bellied stove in the corner and a narrow cot against one wall. Ryder helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. "It is not much," he said, pulling supplies from his saddlebags, "but it is shelter. I brought some food, enough for a few days. There is a creek about 50 yards east, good clean water." Zelda watched him move around the small space, lighting a fire in the stove, unpacking tins of beans and coffee, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. His movements were economical, practiced, and she realized he must have planned this, must have packed those supplies before he came looking for her in town. "You knew this would happen," she said slowly. "You knew what would happen when I spoke out." Ryder paused in his work, his back to her. "I knew Blackwell would not let a challenge to his authority stand. I have seen what he does to people who cross him." He turned to face her, and in the dim light filtering through the dusty windows, his expression was unreadable. "My sister worked as his housekeeper 2 years ago. She noticed the same things you did, money going missing, lies told to cover his tracks. She mentioned it to one of the church elders." He was quiet for a moment. 3 days later, her room caught fire. She barely made it out alive, but she lost everything, and everyone said it was her own carelessness with a candle. "But you do not think it was," Zelda whispered. "I know it was not. Sarah never went to bed without checking every candle twice, and there was accelerant used. I could smell it in the ashes." Ryder's jaw tightened. "But I could not prove it, and the sheriff was not interested in investigating an accident involving a servant girl. Sarah left California, went back east to live with our aunt. And I stayed, watching Blackwell, waiting for a chance to expose him." Understanding dawned. "You were waiting for someone like me." "I was waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to stand up publicly, someone who could not be easily dismissed or scared away." He met her eyes directly. "I did not expect you to pay such a high price for it. I am sorry for that." Zelda sank down onto the cot, suddenly exhausted. "I knew what I was risking. I just thought, maybe if I said it in front of everyone, maybe if I made them listen, they would see the truth." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong. You were not wrong about Blackwell, just wrong about people's willingness to face ugly truths about someone they trust." Ryder poured water from a canteen into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink. You have had a rough day." She accepted the cup gratefully, realizing how dry her throat was. The water was cool and sweet, probably from snowmelt higher in the mountains. When she looked up, Ryder was watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you rest. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to clear your name and bring Blackwell down." He picked up his hat from where he had set it on the small table. "I need to get back before I am missed, but I will return tomorrow with more supplies. Keep the door barred and do not light the stove after dark. Smoke could give away your location. Ryder," he paused at the door, "thank you for believing me, for helping me, for everything." He nodded once, then stepped out into the fading light. Zelda heard the sound of his horse moving away. Then silence broken only by the wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk. She was alone in a lined shack in the middle of nowhere, cast out from the only home she had known in California, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the word of a cowboy she barely knew. But she was alive, and she had an ally. It was more than she had expected an hour ago. The next morning arrived with the harsh cry of a scrub jay and golden light streaming through the gaps in the walls. Zelda woke stiff and sore on the narrow cot, her temple throbbing where the stone had grazed her. She used water from the canteen to clean the wound as best she could, studying her reflection in a fragment of mirror hanging near the door. Her face was pale beneath the dust, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was still fire there. She had not been broken yet. She spent the morning exploring her immediate surroundings, finding the creek Ryder had mentioned and washing her face and hands in the cold water. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, all golden grass and gray-green scrub, with the mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. She could understand why people came to California seeking their fortunes, seeking new lives. The land itself seemed to promise transformation. Ryder returned just after noon, riding up the trail with a second horse in tow, a gray mare with kind eyes. He dismounted and tied both animals to the rail Zelda had not noticed yesterday in her distress. "Thought you might want your own horse," he said, pulling a bundle from his saddlebag. "This is Stella. She is gentle but has stamina. If you need to run, she will get you somewhere safe." "I cannot accept a horse from you," Zelda protested, even as her heart leaped at the sight of the mare. "That is too much. She is not mine to give. She is yours if you want her. I bought her this morning from a widow selling off her husband's things, paid with my own money, fair and square." Ryder's tone was matter of fact. "You need a way out if trouble comes, and I need to know you have options." Zelda approached the mare slowly, letting Stella sniff her hand before stroking the soft nose. "She is beautiful." "She is practical," Ryder corrected, but there was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "I also brought you some clothes. Cannot have you riding around in a dress that is falling apart." The bundle contained men's clothing, denim pants and a cotton shirt, along with a hat and a pair of worn boots that looked like they might actually fit. Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I cannot wear these." "Why not? You planning to stay in proper society?" Ryder's tone was gentle but firm. "Out here, no one cares if you wear pants or a ball gown. What matters is staying alive and comfortable. Those clothes are practical. Your dress is not." He was right, of course. Zelda took the bundle and retreated into the shack to change. The pants felt strange at first, almost scandalous but also liberating. She could move freely, could stride instead of mince, could sit astride instead of side saddle. When she emerged, Ryder gave her an approving nod. "Better. Now you look like someone who can handle herself." He had spread out papers on the small table, and Zelda recognized ledger pages. "I need you to look at these. Tell me if they match what you saw in Blackwell's office." Zelda bent over the papers, her seamstress's eye for detail immediately catching the discrepancies. "Where did you get these?" "I have a friend who works at the bank. He has been suspicious of Blackwell's deposits for a while now, especially when they do not match the church's reported income." Ryder pointed to a series of numbers. "See here. Blackwell deposited $300 last month, but the church records show only $150 in donations. The other $150 came from the Widows and Orphans Fund," Zelda said, her anger rekindling. "I saw him move it. He said it was temporary, just borrowing until the next big donation came in, but he has been doing it for months. That is theft, plain and simple." Ryder gathered the papers carefully. "But we need more than copies of bank records and your testimony to convince the town. We need something irrefutable." They spent the afternoon going over everything Zelda remembered from her time cleaning the church office, every conversation she had overheard, every suspicious transaction she had witnessed. Ryder listened intently, asking sharp questions, building a picture of Blackwell's corruption that went deeper than either of them had initially suspected. As the sun began to set, Ryder stood and stretched. "I need to head back, but I will return tomorrow. We are getting closer to having enough evidence to take to the territorial marshal. Local law might be in Blackwell's pocket, but the marshal answers to a higher authority." "Be careful," Zelda said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "If Blackwell suspects you are helping me." "He will not." Ryder met her eyes and something passed between them, a spark of connection that made Zelda's breath catch. "I have been playing the loyal ranch hand for 2 years, waiting for my moment. I can hold out a little longer." After he left, Zelda sat outside the shack watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She thought about Ryder's sister, about all the other people Blackwell had hurt, about the courage it took to keep fighting even when no one believed you. And she thought about the man who had chosen to believe her, who had risked everything to give her a chance at justice. The days fell into a rhythm. Ryder would arrive each afternoon with supplies and news from town. The story there was that Zelda had fled in shame, admitting her lies by her cowardice. Blackwell was using her absence to paint himself as the victim of a disturbed woman's delusions, gaining even more sympathy and support from the congregation. "It makes me sick," Ryder said one afternoon, a week after Zelda's exile. They were sitting outside the shack, watching Stella and Ryder's gelding, whom Zelda had learned was named Buck, graze peacefully nearby. "He is using what he did to you to make himself more powerful." "That is what men like him do," Zelda replied. She had been thinking a lot about power in the past week, about who had it and how they used it. They turn everything to their advantage. Even their crimes become proof of their righteousness. Ryder was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tell me about yourself. Not about Blackwell or Jamestown, but about you. Where did you come from before California?" It was the first truly personal question he had asked, and Zelda found herself wanting to answer. "Minnesota originally. My father was a carpenter. My mother took in sewing. They died of fever when I was 19, within a week of each other. I stayed for a few years, worked as a seamstress, but everything reminded me of them. I wanted to start fresh somewhere new. So you came to California." "I came to California," she agreed. "Thought I could build a new life in a new place. Thought maybe I could be someone different out here." She laughed softly. "Turns out I am still the same person who cannot keep quiet when she sees injustice." "I am glad you are," Ryder said quietly. When she looked at him, surprised, he continued, "The world needs people who cannot keep quiet, needs people who speak up even when it costs them everything." "What about you?" Zelda asked. "What brought you to California?" "Same thing that brings most men out here. Promise of opportunity, chance to make something of myself." Ryder pulled up a stem of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "My father wanted me to take over his general store back in Ohio, but I wanted more than a life behind a counter. Wanted adventure, I suppose. Or maybe I was just running from his expectations. Do you regret it? Sometimes. Especially after what happened to Sarah." He tossed the grass away. "But then I think about what I would have become if I stayed. Safe, comfortable, probably content, but never truly alive, you know. Never tested, never pushed to become more than what was expected." Zelda understood exactly what he meant. Out here, everything is stripped down to essentials. You learn what you are really made of. "And what are you made of, Zelda Olsen?" Ryder's eyes met hers, intense and searching. "Fire and stubbornness, apparently," she said, trying to lighten the moment, but her voice came out breathless. "Courage and integrity," Ryder corrected softly. "Do not sell yourself short." The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. Zelda realized she had been alone with this man for a week now, had been depending on him, trusting him, and somewhere in that time, her feelings had shifted from gratitude to something deeper, something that made her heart race when he rode up the trail each afternoon. But before either of them could say anything more, Buck raised his head, ears pricked forward. Ryder was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Someone is coming," he said, voice low and urgent. "Get inside. Now." Zelda obeyed, grabbing Stella's reins and leading the mare around behind the shack where she would be hidden from the trail. Through a gap in the walls, she watched as 3 riders emerged from the trees. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the man in front. Sheriff Tom Winters, with 2 deputies flanking him. "Zimmerman," the sheriff called out, reining in his horse. "Heard you have been riding out this way a lot lately. Curious thing, seeing as how this line shack is supposed to be abandoned." Checking the property, Ryder replied, his tone casual. Boss wanted to know if it is worth repairing or if we should tear it down for salvage. That's so. Sheriff Winters dismounted, his eyes scanning the area. He was a heavy-set man with gray mutton chops and a belly that strained the buttons of his vest. Would not have anything to do with that woman who caused such trouble in town last week, would it? Why would it? Ryder's hand stayed near his gun, casual but ready. I heard she ran off. Could be halfway to Sacramento by now. Could be, the sheriff agreed. But Reverend Blackwell is concerned she might be hiding nearby, plotting more mischief. He is worried about the safety of the town, about what false accusations might do to innocent people. Zelda pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Through the gap, she could see Ryder's face, calm and unconcerned, giving nothing away. If I see her, I will be sure to report it, Ryder said. But like I said, I have been out here checking buildings, nothing more. One of the deputies, a young man with a patchy beard, cleared his throat. Sheriff, there is fresh ashes in that fire pit. Someone has been using this place recent. Sheriff Winters's expression hardened. Search the shack. You do not have cause, Ryder said, his voice sharp now. This is Triple Creek property. You need permission from the owner to search. I have cause when I am looking for a fugitive, the sheriff shot back. Step aside, Zimmerman, or I will arrest you for obstruction. Zelda's mind raced. She could not let Ryder take the fall for helping her. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped out from behind the shack, leading Stella with her. No need to search, she called out, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I am right here, Sheriff, and I am no fugitive. I am a woman who told the truth and was punished for it. The sheriff spun to face her, his face reddening. Zelda Olsen, you are under arrest for disturbing the peace and making false accusations against a man of God. Those are not crimes and you know it, Zelda replied. She saw Ryder moving from the corner of her eye, positioning himself between her and the deputies. What is a crime is stealing from widows and orphans, which is exactly what Reverend Blackwell has been doing. You have no proof of these wild claims, Sheriff Winters blustered, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, or guilt, actually we do, Ryder said. He pulled folded papers from inside his shirt, the bank records they had been studying. Right here. Proof that Blackwell has been embezzling from the church fund for months. Proof that he has been lying to the congregation and pocketing money meant for the vulnerable. The sheriff looked at the papers, his expression growing darker. Where did you get these? From someone who cares more about justice than keeping a corrupt preacher happy, Ryder replied. You can arrest us if you want, but those documents are going to the territorial marshal either way. Your choice is whether you want to be known as the sheriff who covered up theft and persecution, or the one who helped expose it. For a long moment, no one moved. The deputies looked at each other nervously. The sheriff stared at the papers in Ryder's outstretched hand, clearly calculating his options. Finally, the young deputy spoke up. Sheriff, my ma is one of the widows who depends on that church fund. If what they are saying is true, if Blackwell has been stealing, well, I cannot be part of covering that up. Keep your mouth shut, Parker, the sheriff growled, but his heart was not in it. No, sir, I will not. The deputy, Parker, dismounted and walked over to stand beside Ryder. I became a lawman to protect people, not to help a thief hide his crimes. If these papers show what Mr. Zimmerman says they show, then we need to investigate, proper and legal. The other deputy hesitated, then shook his head. I am with the sheriff. This is all nonsense from a troublemaking woman. Then we are at an impasse, Ryder said calmly. 2 against 2. Except Miss Olsen and I are the ones with evidence, and Deputy Parker is the one with integrity. Sheriff Winters looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight seemed to drain out of him. "You are putting me in an impossible position, Zimmerman. Blackwell has influence all through this county. If I investigate him without solid proof, I will be run out of office." "Then it is good we have solid proof," Zelda said, finding her courage. "Look at those papers, Sheriff. Really look at them. Then ask yourself if you want to be remembered as the man who let a criminal hide behind a collar because it was politically convenient." The sheriff took the papers from Ryder with reluctant hands. He studied them in the fading light, his frown deepening with each page. When he finally looked up, he seemed older, tired. "These are serious allegations. I would need to verify these numbers with the bank, cross-reference them with church records." "We can provide everything you need," Ryder assured him. "But we need your word that you will conduct a real investigation, not just go through the motions to appease Blackwell." Sheriff Winters looked at Zelda for a long moment. "Did you really see the original ledgers? Can you testify to what was in them?" "I can," Zelda said firmly. "I can describe every entry, every inconsistency. I kept notes, Sheriff. They are hidden, but I can retrieve them." "Where?" "In the church itself," Zelda admitted. "I sewed them into the back of a kneeling cushion in the front pew, figured it was the last place anyone would look, and I wanted them somewhere I could get to if I needed them." Despite the tension, Ryder let out a low whistle. "That is brilliant." "That is evidence," Sheriff Winters corrected, but there was a hint of respect in his voice. "If those notes support these bank records, we might actually have a case." He turned to his remaining deputy. "Mitchell, you can ride back to town and report that we found nothing, or you can be part of bringing a criminal to justice. Your choice." Deputy Mitchell looked like he had bitten into something sour, but he nodded reluctantly. "I will keep quiet for now. But if this goes sideways, I am saying I was following orders." "Fair enough." The sheriff folded the papers and tucked them into his jacket. "Here is what we are going to do. Miss Olsen stays hidden for now. No point putting her back in danger if the town is still riled up. Deputy Parker, you and I are going to pay a visit to the bank tomorrow, quiet-like, and verify these numbers. Zimmerman, you are going to figure out how to get those notes out of the church without Blackwell knowing." "I can do it," Zelda said immediately. "I know the building, know when it is empty. If I go at dawn before anyone is awake, I can slip in and out without being seen." "Too dangerous," Ryder said flatly. "If anyone catches you, they will not wait for a trial." "He is right," Sheriff Winters agreed, "but we need those notes." "Is there anyone else who could retrieve them?" "Someone Blackwell would not suspect," Zelda thought hard, running through everyone she knew in Jamestown. Most of them hated her now, or at least feared being associated with her. But there was one person who might help if she could be reached. Mrs. Patterson, she said slowly. "The widow with 4 children. She has been kind to me, and she is the one suffering most from Blackwell's theft. If we could get word to her, explain what we are trying to do, she might be willing to help." "Sarah Patterson." Deputy Parker's face brightened. "She is a good woman. My ma knows her from the quilting circle. I could talk to her quiet-like, explain the situation." "Do it," the sheriff ordered, "but carefully. If Blackwell gets wind of what we are doing, he will destroy any evidence he has not already hidden." He looked at Zelda and Ryder. "You two stay out here and stay quiet. I will send word when we have something." After the lawman left, Zelda felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on the ground, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaky. Ryder knelt beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said, but his tone was admiring. "Probably both." "I could not let them arrest you," Zelda replied. "You have done too much for me already." "I would have managed," Ryder assured her, but he did not move his hand away. "Though I admit, your timing was dramatic, very effective." Despite everything, Zelda found herself laughing. "Apparently I have a talent for drama. Who knew?" "I knew," Ryder said softly. "From the moment you stood up in that church and called out a fraud in front of his own congregation. That takes a special kind of person." Their eyes met, and Zelda felt the air shift again, felt the pull between them growing stronger. She was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth of his hand on her shoulder, of the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and rare. "Ryder," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, knowing only that something was happening between them that felt inevitable and terrifying and right. He leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Tell me to stop if you want me to stop." But stopping was the last thing Zelda wanted. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle and quickly deepened into something fierce and hungry. All the fear and tension and loneliness of the past week poured into that kiss, along with something new, something that felt like hope and possibility and the promise of not being alone anymore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since I pulled you into that alley," he admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" Zelda asked, her fingers tangling in his shirt. "Wanted to make sure you were kissing me because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated." Ryder's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You have been through hell, Zelda. The last thing you needed was me complicating things." "You are not a complication," Zelda said firmly. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember." They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other, savoring the moment. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were out in full force, and the night air was cool against Zelda's flushed skin. "We should get some rest," Ryder said reluctantly. "Tomorrow could bring news and we need to be ready." But he did not leave. Instead, they sat together outside the shack, Zelda leaning against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, watching the stars wheel overhead. It was the most peace Zelda had felt since everything fell apart, and she held on to it, knowing that peace was fragile in a world like theirs. 2 days passed before Deputy Parker arrived with news. Zelda and Ryder had fallen into an easy intimacy during that time, sharing meals and stories, stealing kisses when the mood struck, learning to read each other's silences. It felt natural, like they had known each other far longer than a week and a half. "Mrs. Patterson agreed to help," Parker announced, dismounting quickly. "She is furious about what Blackwell did, both to the fund and to Miss Olsen. She retrieved the notes this morning during early service, said she dropped her prayer book and had to search under the pews for it. No one suspected a thing." He handed Zelda a small bundle of papers, her own handwriting staring back at her. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by hope. "The sheriff has been comparing these with the bank records," Parker continued. "It all matches up, Miss Olsen. Every discrepancy you noted, every missing dollar. We have got him dead to rights." "What happens now?" Ryder asked, his hand finding Zelda's and squeezing gently. "Now the sheriff confronts Blackwell, with the territorial marshal present. Marshal Thompson arrived in Jamestown yesterday, just passing through, but the sheriff convinced him to stay." Parker grinned. "Blackwell does not know it yet, but his world is about to come crashing down." "I want to be there," Zelda said immediately. "I want to see his face when he is exposed." "I do not think that is wise," Parker began, but Zelda cut him off. "I earned the right to be there. This started when I stood up and called him out. I should be there when justice is finally served." "She is right," Ryder said. "Besides, her testimony might be needed. She was the one who saw the original ledgers, who can speak to what she witnessed." Parker looked uncomfortable but nodded. "I will talk to the sheriff." "But Miss Olsen, you have to understand, the town might not welcome you back. even after Blackwell is arrested. Some people do not like being proven wrong. I do not care about being welcomed back, Zelda said truthfully. I care about making sure that man cannot hurt anyone else. The confrontation was set for the following day, Sunday afternoon, right after service. The sheriff wanted the congregation there, wanted them to see and hear the truth for themselves. It was risky, potentially explosive, but Zelda appreciated the poetry of it. Blackwell would fall in the same place where he had held such power. She and Ryder rode into Jamestown at noon, taking back streets to avoid notice until the appointed time. Marshal Thompson was a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. He listened to Zelda's testimony without interruption, reviewed the evidence with a careful eye, then gave a single nod. "This is solid," he said. "More than enough for an arrest and trial. Sheriff, gather your men. We will do this cleanly and by the law." The church was packed when they arrived, the congregation settling back into their pews after service, murmuring with curiosity at the presence of the law. Reverend Blackwell stood at the pulpit, his expression smooth and unconcerned, but Zelda saw his eyes narrow when he spotted her. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the building, "to what do we owe this unusual visit? Surely it could wait until after the Lord's Day." "Reverend Samuel Blackwell," Marshal Thompson announced, stepping forward. "You are under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. Please step down from the pulpit and come with us peacefully." The church erupted in shocked gasps and angry shouts. Blackwell's face went pale, then flushed red. "This is outrageous. On what grounds? Who dares make such accusations?" "I do," Zelda said, moving to stand beside the marshal. Her voice shook slightly, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "And I have proof. Bank records showing your deposits do not match church income. Ledger entries in your own hand showing money moved from the Widows and Orphans Fund to your personal accounts. Notes documenting months of theft from the very people you were meant to protect." "Lies," Blackwell roared. "The ravings of a bitter woman who was rightfully expelled for her malicious gossip." "Then explain these," Sheriff Winters said, holding up the bank records. "Explain why you deposited $300 last month when the church only took in $150. Explain the missing funds from the charitable accounts. Explain the new horse, the expensive suits, the lavish meals at the hotel, all purchased with money that should have gone to feeding orphans and supporting widows." The congregation was silent now, faces turning from the lawmen to their preacher, doubt and betrayal written clearly on many features. Mrs. Patterson stood up in her pew, her face flushed but her voice steady. "He has been stealing from us," she said loudly. "From me, from my children, from every person in this town who needed help. And when Miss Olsen tried to expose him, we drove her out for telling the truth. We should be ashamed." "Ashamed indeed," another voice called out. More people were standing now, anger replacing shock as the evidence mounted. Blackwell saw his control slipping and made one last desperate attempt. "You would take the word of outsiders over your own spiritual shepherd. I have served this community faithfully for 5 years. "You have been robbing this community for 5 years, Marshal Thompson corrected. "And now you will face justice for it. Take him." The deputies moved forward and Blackwell finally seemed to accept his fate. As they led him past Zelda, he leaned in close and hissed, "You have destroyed me." "No," Zelda replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." After Blackwell was taken away, the church dissolved into chaos, people crying and arguing and trying to process what they had just witnessed. The church elders gathered in a tight knot, already discussing how to verify the accounts and return stolen funds to their rightful recipients. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd to embrace Zelda. "I am so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We should have believed you. We should have stood with you." "You are standing with me now," Zelda replied, hugging her back. "That is what matters." Others came forward too, some apologetic, some still skeptical, but the tide had turned. Zelda was no longer the troublemaker who had lied about a good man. She was the brave woman who had exposed a fraud, who had risked everything for the truth. But as the initial furor died down and reality set in, Zelda realized something important. She did not want to stay in Jamestown. Too much had happened here. Too many bitter memories mixed with this victory. This town would never truly be home again. She found Ryder waiting outside the church, leaning against the hitching post with his hat pulled low. When he saw her, his face broke into a genuine smile. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Zelda corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "So what now?" Ryder pushed off from the post, moving closer. "You have your reputation back. You could rebuild here, start over." Zelda shook her head slowly. "I do not want to stay. There are too many ghosts in this town now. Too many what-ifs and painful memories." She met his eyes directly. "What I want is to go somewhere new, somewhere I can truly start fresh." "Where would you go?" Ryder asked, and there was something careful in his tone, like he was afraid of the answer. "I was thinking maybe north, up toward Oregon Territory. I hear there are new towns starting up, places that need skilled seamstresses." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "But I was also thinking I might not want to make that journey alone." Understanding dawned in Ryder's eyes, followed by hope so bright it took Zelda's breath away. "Is that an invitation?" "It is if you are interested," Zelda replied. "I know it has only been a couple of weeks and maybe this is crazy, but I do not want to lose you, Ryder. These past days, even with all the danger and uncertainty, have been some of the happiest of my life. Because I was not facing things alone anymore. Because I had you." Ryder closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I've been half in love with you since you faced down that mob with your chin up and fire in your eyes. Watching you fight for justice, watching you refuse to back down even when everything was against you, I knew I had found something rare. Someone rare." He kissed her forehead gently. "So yes, Zelda Olsen, I will come with you to Oregon or California, or the edge of the world if that is where you want to go." "Oregon is far enough for now," Zelda said, laughing through sudden tears. "We can save the edge of the world for later." They made their plans quickly over the next few days. Ryder gave notice at the Triple Creek Ranch, collecting his wages and buying supplies for the journey north. Zelda reclaimed her belongings from Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, though she sold most of them, keeping only her sewing kit and a few precious personal items. The church elders offered her compensation for what she had endured, money from the recovered funds, but she refused. "Give it to the widows and orphans," she told them. "Give it to the people it was meant for in the first place." But she did accept a gift from Mrs. Patterson and the other widows, a beautiful quilt made from scraps of their dresses, each piece telling a story of survival and community. "So you remember us," Mrs. Patterson said. "And so you know you will always have friends in Jamestown, no matter what happened." On a golden morning in late August, Zelda and Ryder rode out of Jamestown together, heading north toward new territory and new possibilities. Stella and Buck moved at an easy pace, and the saddlebags were packed with everything they needed for the journey. It would take weeks to reach Oregon Territory, following rough trails through the mountains and valleys, but Zelda found she did not mind. She had Ryder beside her, had a clear destination, and most importantly, had the freedom to choose her own path. They traveled through the Sierra Nevada foothills, through forests of pine and cedar that smelled like Christmas morning, past streams so clear you could count the stones on the bottom. They camped under stars that seemed close enough to touch, and Ryder taught Zelda how to build a proper fire and cook over open flame. She taught him how to mend his torn shirts and complained good-naturedly about how rough he was on his clothes. "You know," Ryder said one evening as they sat by the fire, "we have been traveling together for 2 weeks now, sleeping under the same stars, but we have not really talked about what this is, what we are." Zelda looked up from the sock she was darning. "What do you want us to be?" "I want you to be my wife," Ryder said bluntly. "I know it is fast, and maybe you think I am crazy, but I am sure, Zelda, I do not need more time to know you are who I want to spend my life with." Zelda set down her darning, her heart hammering. "I want that too," she admitted. "I have never been so sure of anything. These weeks with you have taught me what partnership really means, what it feels like to have someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my strength and does not try to diminish it." "So, is that a yes?" Ryder asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "That is absolutely a yes," Zelda confirmed. "Though I think we should wait until we reach a proper town before we make it official. I want to marry you wearing something better than trail dust and borrowed pants." Ryder laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. "Deal. But I am holding you to it." They found a circuit preacher in a small logging town called Millbrook, just over the California border into Oregon territory. The town was rough and ready, more lumber camp than settlement, but it had a store, a saloon, and most importantly, a minister. They were married on a Tuesday afternoon with the storekeeper and his wife as witnesses. Zelda wearing a simple blue dress she had sewn herself from fabric traded for mending work, and Ryder in his cleanest shirt with his hair slicked back and his jaw freshly shaved. It was nothing like the grand weddings Zelda had imagined as a girl. No fancy church or elaborate celebration. But standing in that rough chapel with Ryder's hand warm in hers, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought, Zelda felt more joy than she had ever known. This was what marriage should be, she thought. Two people choosing each other freely, building a future together on foundations of respect and trust and genuine affection. Their wedding night was spent in the boarding house above the store, in a room with thin walls and a lumpy mattress. But none of that mattered when Ryder kissed her like she was precious, when he took his time learning her body with gentle hands and patient exploration. Zelda had been nervous, knew only vague details about what happened between husband and wife, but Ryder made it easy, made it beautiful, made her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. "I love you," he whispered against her skin as they lay tangled together afterward, moonlight streaming through the single window. "I love your courage and your fire and your stubborn insistence on doing what is right even when it costs you everything." "I love you too," Zelda replied, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I love that you believed in me when no one else would. I love that you see me as a partner, not a possession. I love the man you are and the life we are building together." They continued north, following rumors of new settlements and opportunities. In a town called Roseburg, they found what they were looking for. It was a young community, barely 5 years old, built around logging and farming. The main street boasted a general store, a blacksmith, a hotel, and not much else, but there was energy there, a sense of possibility. "They need a seamstress," Zelda observed, watching women in rough homespun dresses go about their business, "and probably a dozen other trades." "And I bet they need ranch hands," Ryder added. "There are cattle operations starting up all through the valley. I could get work easily." They rented a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs. Zelda set up her sewing business, putting up notices at the store and the hotel. Within a week, she had more work than she could handle, mending and altering and creating new garments for settlers who had worn out their traveling clothes. Ryder found work at her ranch 10 miles north, breaking horses and managing cattle, coming home every evening tired but satisfied. It was a good life, simple and hard-working but honest. They made friends in Roseburg, became part of the community. Zelda joined a quilting circle and shared her story, though she downplayed the drama and emphasized the importance of speaking truth to power. The women of Roseburg were tough and practical, and they respected her for standing up even when it cost her everything. As autumn turned to winter, Zelda realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week before telling Ryder, wanting to be sure, but when she finally shared the news one evening as they sat by the fire, his reaction erased any lingering anxiety. A baby. He breathed, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. It seems that way," Zelda confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ryder said, pulling her into his arms. "Zelda, you have given me everything. A purpose, a home, a future. And now a child. I feel like the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for months, could barely keep food down, and worried constantly that something would go wrong. But Ryder was patient and attentive, bringing her weak tea and dry toast, rubbing her back when the nausea got bad, reading to her from old newspapers to keep her distracted. As winter gave way to spring and her belly swelled with new life, Zelda found herself reflecting on how much had changed in less than a year. She had gone from a lonely seamstress in Jamestown to a wife and soon-to-be mother in Oregon, from an outcast to a respected member of a community. And it all traced back to that moment when she chose to speak up, when she refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked one evening as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset. "Standing up to Blackwell, starting all of this." "Never," Zelda said firmly, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "Everything good in my life now came from that choice. Yes, I lost things. My home, my security, my place in that community. But I gained so much more. I gained you, I gained my self-respect, I gained the knowledge that I can survive anything. Those are worth more than any comfort." "You are remarkable," Ryder said softly. "I hope our child has your courage." Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1879, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Matthew, after Ryder's father, with the middle name of Justice, because Zelda could not resist the symbolic weight. He was perfect, all 10 fingers and 10 toes accounted for, with his father's green eyes and a shock of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, Zelda felt a surge of fierce, protective love. This tiny person was depending on her and Ryder to keep him safe, to raise him right, to teach him how to navigate a world that could be beautiful and cruel in equal measure. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "Hello, Matthew Justice Zimmerman," she whispered, tracing his tiny features. "Welcome to the world. Your father and I are going to do our best by you." Ryder leaned over her shoulder, his finger gently grasped by Matthew's impossibly small hand. "We will teach him to be honest and brave, to stand up for what is right, and to never underestimate the power of speaking truth." As Matthew grew from baby to toddler, Zelda's sewing business flourished. She hired 2 young women to help her keep up with demand, teaching them the trade while building something larger than herself. Ryder was promoted to foreman at the ranch, his skill with horses and his honest dealings earning him respect and trust. They bought land outside Roseburg, 5 acres with a creek running through it, and built a proper house. 2 stories with a real kitchen and bedrooms for the children they hoped to have. Matthew got a little sister when he was 3, a bright-eyed girl they named Sarah, after Ryder's sister. The real Sarah came to visit from Ohio, healthy and happy, and married herself, and the 2 women bonded instantly over their shared experience of being hurt by Blackwell and choosing to move forward anyway. "You saved my brother," Sarah told Zelda one afternoon while they watched the children play. "He wrote me after everything happened in Jamestown, told me how you gave him purpose again, how helping you reminded him why he came west in the first place." "He saved me first," Zelda replied. "We saved each other, I think. That is what the best partnerships do." As the years passed, Zelda and Ryder built a life filled with hard work and deep love. They expanded the house twice to accommodate 2 more children, twin boys born when Sarah was 5. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, celebrated victories and mourned losses. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams, raising their children to be honest and brave. Zelda never forgot Jamestown or what had happened there. She received occasional letters from Mrs. Patterson, updating her on the town's recovery after Blackwell's arrest. The Reverend had been convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the church had slowly rebuilt with new leadership focused on genuine service rather than personal gain. The scandal had been painful but ultimately cleansing, forcing the community to examine how easily they had been manipulated. "Do you ever want to go back?" Ryder asked one evening, 20 years after they first arrived in Roseburg. They were sitting on the porch of their now substantial home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their children were grown or nearly so, Matthew preparing to start his own ranch, Sarah teaching school in town, the twins still figuring out their paths. "To visit, maybe someday," Zelda replied, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "To show the children where their parents' story began, but this is home now. Oregon is where we built our life, where we raised our family. This is where we belong." "I am glad," Ryder said, squeezing her hand, "because I cannot imagine being anywhere else with anyone else. You are still the bravest person I know, Zelda. Still fighting for what is right, still speaking up when you see injustice." It was true. Over the years, Zelda had become known in Roseburg as someone who could be counted on to champion the vulnerable, to call out unfairness, to organize support for those in need. She had helped establish a school fund for children from poor families, had fought against unfair labor practices at the lumber mill, had stood up countless times when it would have been easier to stay silent. And through it all, Ryder had been beside her, supporting and encouraging, adding his own steady strength to her fire. They had become pillars of the community, respected and loved, their story whispered as an example of how courage and integrity could triumph over corruption and fear. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration, friends and neighbors gathering to honor the couple who had given so much to Roseburg. Matthew stood up to give a toast, his own wife and young son beside him. "My parents taught me that doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always worth it," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded hall. "They taught me that true strength lies not in dominating others but in lifting them up. They taught me that love is partnership, that marriage is choosing someone every day and building a life together one decision at a time." He raised his glass. "To Ryder and Zelda Zimmerman, the finest people I know, and the best example of what a life well lived looks like." As everyone drank to the toast, Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about that terrified woman standing on courthouse steps in Jamestown, being pelted with stones for speaking truth. She thought about the cowboy who had offered his hand and said, "You were right. Come with me." She thought about every choice and challenge and triumph that had brought them to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered to Ryder, who still sat beside her after all these years, "for believing in me when no one else would, for building this life with me, for everything." "Thank you," Ryder replied, his eyes suspiciously bright, "for being brave enough to speak up, brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, brave enough to build something beautiful out of the ashes of what you lost. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Zimmerman." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their friends and family. Two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and created the best of lives. Their story had become legend in Roseburg, the tale of the woman who stood up to corruption and the cowboy who helped her escape, who had fallen in love on a desperate flight north and built an empire of family and community and unwavering principle. Years later, when Zelda and Ryder were old and gray, their children grown with families of their own, they would still sit on that porch and watch the sunset together. They would hold hands and remember Jamestown, remember the lined shack where they first kissed, remember the long journey north toward a future they could barely imagine. "If you could go back," Ryder asked one evening when they were both in their 70s, their bodies worn but their spirits still strong, "would you do anything differently?" Zelda considered the question seriously, looking back over a life filled with love and purpose and occasional hardship. "I would speak up against Blackwell sooner," she decided. "Would not wait so long to act on what I knew was wrong, but everything else, everything that led to us to this life, I would not change a single moment. Not even the stones and the exile and the fear," Ryder pressed gently. "Especially not those," Zelda replied firmly. "Because those moments taught me what I was made of. They taught me I could survive anything, could rebuild from nothing. And they brought me you, which makes every hardship worth it 1,000 times over." They lived to see Matthew's son take over the ranch, to see Sarah become principal of the school she had once taught in, to see the twins establish a successful freight business running goods between Roseburg and Portland. They lived to see Oregon achieve statehood, to see the railroad finally reach their corner of the territory, to see the rough settlement they had helped build grow into a thriving town. And when Zelda finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, with Ryder holding her hand and their children gathered around, her last thoughts were of gratitude. Gratitude for a life fully lived, for battles fought and won, for a love that had sustained her through everything, for the courage to speak truth even when it cost her everything. Ryder followed her 2 years later, his heart simply giving out after more than 50 years of devoted service. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking Roseburg, under a shared headstone that read, "Zelda and Ryder Zimmerman. They spoke truth and lived with courage. They loved fiercely and built something beautiful." Their story continued to be told in Roseburg for generations, becoming part of the town's history, a reminder that one person's courage could change the world, that standing up for what was right mattered even when the cost was high. And that sometimes, in the darkest moments, a stranger could offer their hand and say, "Come with me." And that simple act could be the beginning of something extraordinary. Children in Roseburg grew up hearing about the woman who was cast out for speaking against the preacher, and the cowboy who believed her and offered her escape. They learned that justice sometimes required sacrifice, that love could flourish even in hardship, and that the strongest foundations were built on integrity and mutual respect. The house Zelda and Ryder built remained in the Zimmerman family for over a century, passing from generation to generation, each one adding their own stories to the legacy. The porch where they sat and watched countless sunsets became a gathering place for family reunions and celebrations, a physical reminder of the life they had built together. And somewhere in Oregon, preserved in a family Bible passed down through the generations, were the notes Zelda had sewn into that church cushion, the evidence that had brought down a corrupt preacher and started a journey that changed everything. They were yellowed now, fragile with age, but the words remained clear, a testament to one woman's refusal to stay silent and the man who loved her for it. In the end, their story was not about dramatic rescues or grand gestures, though both played their parts. It was about choosing each other every day, about building a life one decision at a time, about having the courage to stand up for what was right, and the wisdom to know when to hold tight to the person standing beside you. It was about justice and love, courage and partnership, hardship and triumph. It was about two people who found each other in the Wild West of 1878 and created something that lasted beyond their lifetimes, touching everyone who heard their story and reminding them that one voice speaking truth could change everything, especially when someone believed enough to say, "Come with me." And in Roseburg, Oregon, on the porch of the house they built together, if you sit quietly on a summer evening and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, you might almost hear the echoes of their laughter, feel the warmth of their enduring love, and understand why their story continues to matter more than a century later. Because it speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit, about our capacity for courage and love and building beautiful things from broken beginnings. That is the legacy of Zelda and Ryder Zimmerman, the woman who spoke truth and the cowboy who believed her, who built a love story for the ages in the Wild West of America.